Welcome back to the Morning Grind, RotoGrinders. This is Dean with you for the last time. Next time you guys tune into the show, it's going to be Stevie. Stevie's taking over on Thursday, the start of the MLB season. He'll be talking some baseball. Side note, there will be a split-off podcast. They'll be talking basketball as well, too. Stay tuned for that. That said, daily fantasy sports, all we care about is today and today only. Well, that probably doesn't work right now because we're recording this on Tuesday nights. I appreciate Artivore, SunTszu Joe. We're talking MMA one last time here. Joe, how are things in your world? And you're excited because I know you made it to the DK Live final.
Just when I thought I'm done, they pull me back. I issued my, thank you to RotoGrinders email, tweet out, and now back for one final. I'm happy to be here. This is, just so you guys know, the only pod I'm doing this week because I did make it to the finals, and I'm going up against some real heavyweights in like Awesome Mo and Chipotle Addict and Papa Gates, and inside of DFS MMA, guys like DFS Wins, so these are all names you recognize from other sports that are in this final, and it's the final 25. It's the knockout challenge. First place is 50,000, which is nice. It's not super top heavy like the Millie Maker, and there's only 25 people in this. So second place is 25, third is 15, I believe fourth is 10. And then if you were to finish in 25th place, you would still get $1,000. So it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. So I was actually happy to make it, considering I thought I had some pedestrian lineups. I think each of the two lineups that made it past, first it starts with 100, then it goes to 50, then 50 to 25. I think I had two losses in each one of those lineups. And it was always like I got the main event right in each one of those lineups, and that sort of pushed me through. So yeah, I'm excited for that reason. And Dean, for the first time in the history of the UFC, we have 15 scheduled fights. That has never happened before. We've had a couple of 14-fight slates, but honestly, we've had more 11-fight slates than we've had 14-fight slates. So knock on wood, fingers crossed, as long as there's no cancellations, we will have a 15-fight card on Saturday.
Yeah, so that's one of the big talking points as far as a slate. Like, obviously, it changes up the combinations of for making GP lineups. Maybe it's more likely or less likely, I guess, you have a single entry, Binkit at the top. We were talking pre-show, which we'll talk about in a second, about the dude that's minus 1,000, and he's also minus 700 to win within the distance, before they go to the cards. But he's got a ridiculous price tag, just under 10K on DK, and just kind of having the conversation, like, even if he does win, is he going to land on the optimal? Because 15 fights means a couple more fights where more wonkiness can happen. Another 7K person can just, put up 100 points, give or take. So let's talk about that. How are we dealing with 15 fights as opposed to 12 or 13? And again, we're recording this on a Tuesday night under the assumption that there will be 15 fights.
Yeah, so there's a lot more variance, Steve, for sure. Obviously, the more fights, the more fighters, the more variance. Let's talk about the fight that was added. It was Chimiev, who actually fought last Wednesday and, did such a bang-up job in the first round and was so impressive and took literally no damage. He asked Dana White if he could get him another fight. Now, this may even be a step down from the opponent he faced on Wednesday of last week. So that's the 15th fight. This is the guy that is 10-1 on the betting line and 9.8K on DraftKings, which is not a price we've seen since the days of like Chris Cyborg. You generally do not see fighters. And I was talking with RotoGrinders' own Brett Apley about this and asked him, where do you think the salary is going to land? And he's like, 9.6K. It'll be higher than the highest price fighter, but 9.6K. Well, actually, he was wrong. I was wrong. 9.8. What does this mean? Well, what it really means is that if a lot of favorites win, it's going to be really hard for this fighter to be on the optimal. And there are a lot of higher priced favorites. There are very few close to even fights on this card. The main event happens to be one of them, oddly enough. But, if you do the quick math and you look at 9.8K, well, it's pretty easy to figure out what 10K is, right? That's 98 points. To get to 11K, okay, he's going to have to score more than he scored in his last fight. To get to 12X, he's going to need to score 117 plus points. Now, in an early first round finish, in all likelihood, you're not going to get that. You might not even get, in all honesty, 10K. 10x. I keep saying K. You might not get 10x if he finishes this fight early in the first round. So buyer beware. What you're really hoping, and I know this sounds awful because I'm sure this guy he's fighting, this guy he's fighting is a human being. But what you really want to see, purely from a DraftKings, if not a humanitarian perspective, is for this guy to take some damage, and for him to be tough, and for Chimaev to actually win the fight towards the end of the first round, where maybe he gets a knockdown, a takedown, some advances, a large number of significant strikes. That's the best case scenario. If he goes out and just drops him with one punch, I mean, you're looking at 100 points, right? You're looking at bare minimum 10x. I mean, if he gets a finish by some other way that doesn't include a knockdown, it could even be less than that. So there's a lot of variance with 15 fights, 30 fighters. If you're going to use Chimaev in your lineups, you're going to need at least 2 fighters in the 7K range. So you're looking probably at a stars and scrubs type of lineup, which, could work. But that's the real risk when you have such a high price fighter in so many fights.
All right, a couple questions. First question, I know we talked enough. You like to roster every fighter when you're making 150 lineups. Would you sprinkle 1 in 150 on Reese McKee, who's currently plus 600? You finally break your rule.
No, I will have at least one. Look, Chimaev could slip on a banana peel or whatever, I don't know if whatever fruit they're serving in Abu Dhabi. Coming into the Otkin guy, he could sustain an injury that we don't know about. I want to bring everybody back to when Michael Bisping won his middleweight title against Luke Rockhold. Bisping was a big underdog. I mean, he didn't have time to train. He was in the middle of filming. I think, was it one of the Fast and Furious? He was filming some franchise film he was in. Didn't train. Knew he was a huge underdog. But there was a bit of a whisper that, Rockhold had a tear in his, I can't remember where exactly it was, but let's say he was hurt going into the fight. And what does Bisping do? He comes out and he flash KOs him, right? So for that kind of eventuality, and I will agree, it is extremely rare and unlikely to happen. I will have 1 or 2, maybe as many as 3 out of 150 lineups with that big of an underdog, because if he wins, and if he wins by finish, it is going to be a slate breaker. So, I mean, and you are going to really differentiate yourself by having, a lineup or 2 with him in it.
Yeah, that's also understanding, what contest you're in. I'm going to make the assumption that there's no chance he lands in your lineup with 25 people when you're going for 50K, but in a large field tournament, you can do whatever you want.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Quick Google search, by the way. Apparently, Michael Bisping was in Den of Thieves and Triple X. Return of Xander Cage.
Triple X, that's what it was. Yep. It was that was the franchise movie, yeah.
Hypothetically, you have 150 lineups. I can guarantee you no more, no less to 100 points for Chimov. How do you pronounce that dude's name?
Chimaev, yeah.
Okay. You got 100 points, no more, no less, right? That's it. You're locked in. How many of your 150 lineups do you put him in?
Ooh, that's a solid question, because, again, I'm going to go with, and this could be flawed, and people can feel free to agree or disagree. I'm going to proceed under the auspices that you need close to 600 to win a big contest, right? You're going to need 600 to win this week. It's the $15, 100,000 the first. So if that runs true and that you need 600, I probably want no more than 20 or 25% of Chimaev, just because I'm not confident that I'm going to get 600 points with him in a lot of my lineups. Now, that sounds like a lot, 25%, but I also want to caution against, some of the other favorites perhaps losing, and some value opening up on some of those 7K fighters that I need to include in order to get him in my lineup. So the 25% is, okay, maybe this guy is tougher than we think, his opponent. He does go off. He does put up a 120. We get some upsets. And I do want exposure to him. But if, as I feel will happen, he's going to score a relatively early victory in the first round. It's going to put up right at that 105, 107 mark. If I don't get the upsets that I'm looking for, he's not going to be in the optimal. So I want to protect myself. but I also want to, I want 75% of my lineups not to have him so that I could spread a lot further.
Yeah, it's interesting. It basically forces the correlation of we're assuming he's going to knock this dude out. He's 10-1 favorite, which is a massive number. And also it's going to happen inside the distance as well. If you trust Vegas, those Vegas numbers just jumping off the table. The biggest numbers I've seen since I started talking about this.
Yep.
So it's just it's just more of a matter of like not so much what he does, because that's kind of like we are assuming that he's going to do what he's going to do.
Yep.
It's a matter of how many dogs win, and if a bunch of dogs win, he's on the winner. If a bunch of dogs don't win, he's not. It's as simple as that.
And by the way, if he's on the winner, there is going to be a lot of ties if he's on the winner.
Well, let's talk about the main event. That's obviously one of the big things we talk about. Five round fight as opposed to the 3-round fight. We have Whittaker versus Till. Minus 152 to go the distance for what it's worth. And as you said, this is one of the few fights where it's super tight. Whittaker is a slight favorite at minus 120 currently. Till is minus 105. Your thoughts? Who's going to win this bad boy? Just getting pieces on both, or do we potentially stack this in cash?
No, I don't see this as a stackable fight. I mean, Darren Till is very low volume. I look, he can win a decision. He has won a decision. But Darren Till is very low volume, and that's one of the reasons, among others, why I like Whittaker. Although Whittaker generally does look to keep it standing, Darren Till is very susceptible to being taken down. So he has more offensive wrestling than Till has defensive wrestling. So I would think if I was Whittaker and I wanted to kind of end this quickly, I would take like the Woodley route, and I would just look to get him to the ground. And, Whittaker is such a low output striker. If this does turn into a striking affair, I don't see Whittaker even in a win scoring a lot of – I don't see Till even in a win scoring a lot of points. So what I would want to see here, and I do like Whittaker a fair bit in this fight, and I'm surprised at the love for Till. I think part of the I think there's narrative that's driving a lot of this love for Darren Till, there's narrative driving people off of Whittaker. I think people are of the mindset that maybe he took, a couple of life-changing beatings in fights that he once won against Yoel Romero, went out and got starched pretty quickly by Israel Adesanya. Does he still have the drive and the desire to actually, step back in? And honestly, this is a fight that he should win all day long. I mean, Darren Till was rushed up, had a really good win against Cowboy Cerrone. Ended up being really big for welterweight, moved up to middleweight, but he has weaknesses that are very easy to exploit. And he is not a high output striker. So if you're betting Till, or if you like Till in DraftKings, you are thinking that Till is going to finish Whittaker, which I honestly think is very unlikely. So I like Whittaker a fair amount. I like him to look, if he does decide to use wrestling, and just take Till down, pretty much at will is how I see it, and maybe finishes him on the ground. I could see a decent score out of Whittaker. I really don't have a lot of love for Till. I'll throw some lineups in case the narrative is true and Whittaker is really done and doesn't have any motivation to continue fighting and kind of puts in a lethargic effort. Yes, Till could catch him with something, but that would be, for me, more of a fade on Whittaker than endorsing Till. Because he's just such a low output striker, doesn't typically score very well. So I like Whittaker here a fair amount.
Just want to clarify, I'm not sure if I said the reverse of this on FanDuel right now as far as a sportsbook. Will that fight go the distance? Currently, it's no minus 164, yes plus 124. Is this one of those? Again, I kind of propose the same sort of thought process of 150 lineups. Generally speaking, at least the way I've been playing for the most part, you want a piece of the main event. For all the reasons we've laid out previously. How much do we need the main event? It sounds like, well, at least one of the fighters is not particularly active. How fadeable is this fight, especially when you consider there's 15 fights to choose from as opposed to 11 or 12?
I think among the main events we've seen recently, going back, not only to Fight Island, but Las Vegas Annex, I think this is potentially one of the most fadeable main events, because if it somehow goes to a decision, I don't think it's going to be a very high scoring decision either way, unless, Whittaker just gets a lot of takedowns, but for some reason can't finish Till. And I could certainly see Till getting tired in the later rounds. There obviously is the chance that, Whittaker knocks Till out. He's a pretty accurate striker. He's a lot more output than Till, and he's faced exponentially better fighters than Darren Till, right? So I could certainly see him putting up a good number, but I think that, with the variance of the 14 prior fights and with some pretty sizable favorites on this card, that we feel are going to win and have the opportunity to dominate, I certainly think that, you don't need to have 75, 80, 90% exposure to the main event like would have been wise in the prior weeks.
You mentioned the favorites. There is a bunch, like you said. There's a lot of this kind of jump off the board. Wood is currently a minus 455 favorite. Amiv is a minus 375 favorite. Gustafsson minus 360. Dalby minus 265. I think there's another one too that I just kind of skipped over. Boser is minus 240. Who amongst those kind of jumps off to you first?
Well, the first fight of the night, and not just because I feel like saying I've got Wood. It's the first fight of the night. It's Nathaniel Wood. He actually lost his last fight to John Dobson, who is incredibly quick on the feet. Nathaniel Wood, I like him in this spot. It's interesting that it's the first fight of the night. Before Chimurev was added to this card, this was the biggest favorite on the slate. I still think he's going to be fairly highly owned. I do like him a lot here. This fight may actually get out of the first round. So it definitely potential to score here as opposed to, Chimurev, which he could potentially starch this guy early. I do like this fight a fair amount. I think the most vulnerable of those favorites that you mentioned was probably Nicholas Dalby, who got a really favorable decision in his last fight. A lot of people thought it was home cooking. He got a very, very, very favorable, I think it was even a split decision win in his last fight. I think he's probably the most vulnerable. I would never lay 5-2 on him in a fight. So I'd say he's the most vulnerable. And then, you got to look for value, and you got to look for value on this slate because that if you're going to play stars and scrubs, who are the scrubs? Like who has the best chance to win, and who are you going to put in your lineup if you have to play stars and scrubs?
Is Fabricio Verdun one of those potential scrubs? He's 6.9K on DK, and he's a name I recognize.
Yes.
He was once a thing, I believe. Is he still potentially a thing?
Former heavyweight champion, suspended by USADA for PEDs, came back and fought Alexei Oleinik as a big, massive favorite, and just looked old and slow, and lost the decision to Alexei Oleinik. Now, here's what's really interesting about this fight. Alexander Gustafsson, who's had some really memorable fights at light heavyweight, including a fight where he nearly beat John Jones, retired after a fight where he lost to Anthony Smith. He retired. Now, obviously, he did not stay retired, and he's coming back. He's moving up to heavyweight. He's moving up a weight class, so he doesn't have to cut weight. He trains at that All-Stars gym in Sweden, which a couple of fighters, including Chimurev, our darling, trains at. So he's coming back. He's fighting Verdum. If you feel that Verdum had an opportunity to improve off of his last pathetic performance, coming off of, a long layoff. Now, granted, he's a 40-year-old fighter. There are very hardcore statistics about win and loss records of 40-year-old fighters. We almost saw Santos in a recent card, who was a big favorite, fall into that gap where he completely gassed out and almost ended up probably wouldn't have lost the fight, but his opponent got a couple of points taken away for an illegal knee and a shot in the groin. So 40-year-old fighters are generally a pretty difficult proposition. But yeah, at 6.9K, when was the last time anyone saw Fabricio Verdum at 6.9K? He's probably going to get a little bit of ownership. There is kind of a rumor, or there's a whisper going around that Gustafsson might not be in the best shape. Definitely tune in the weigh-ins. I mean, see if he's carrying a gut. See what kind of shape he looks in. But at 6.9K, he's definitely going to get some play.
That fight, for what it's worth, in the FanDuel Sportsbook, will it go the distance? Currently right now, no at minus 200. So we're expecting a finish there. If it's not Verdum, we touched on McKee as a 6.4K cheapie and DK. Like, we don't like him, but just for variance purposes and like the banana pill, you never know. Something really, really goofy could have and embrace goofiness. Give me somebody cheap. I don't know, 7.5 and under. Is there? Do you have a favorite amongst the not so appealing?
There are two fighters in that range that I would consider. You know, one is Carla Esparza against Marianne Rodriguez. You know, Marianne Rodriguez has a distinct height and reach advantage over Esparza, but she just you know, had a draw against Cynthia Cavillo, who is a fighter a lot like Esparza, who uses wrestling. You know, so Rodriguez, if she keeps it standing, she wins all day. But Esparza, who's a good wrestler, who's used wrestling to her advantage in the past, who has a nice little win streak going, if she could use her wrestling, she can certainly win this fight. The other fighter that I like is purely a play on narrative. Peter Sabata, 7.5K, fighting Alex Cowboy Oliveira. During the best of times, Cowboy Oliveira is training as suspect. You know, he definitely gasses out as the fight goes on. He lives in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, which is a horror show right now due to COVID, unfortunately. I don't know how this guy has been training, if he's been training. I can't imagine the gyms in Rio are open with what's going on over there. So if he gasses during good times, what does he have, a round and a half? Now let's look at Peter Sabota. Peter Sabota owns his own gym. So if he's going to open up a gym for training, he's going to do it so he himself could get some rounds in, right? I believe his gym is in Germany. You know, he owns a gym. I'm sure he's had a full camp or as much of a full camp as he could get. You know, if he gets through the first round, and he's not a scrub. I mean, Oliveira has beat better fighters than Peter Sabota, but Peter Sabota, again, because of the narrative, because of the fact that he owns his own gym, he's likely had a better camp than Cowboy Oliveira. The longer this fight goes on, the better chance that Sabota has to get a decision or possibly even a late finish. What Cowboy needs to do is, if he knows he's only got 5 minutes of cardio, go all out in the first round, let the chips fall where they may. And if Sabota cannot survive, Oliveira gets his win. So it's obviously worth playing Oliveira a little bit in case he gets that first round finish. But I actually like Sabota more.
Sabota plus 142 currently in the FanDuel Sportsbook. Essentially a coin toss as to if it's going to finish or not finish. The one I wanted to call back for a second, the women's fight, I believe.
Carlos Esparza.
Yeah, Rodriguez versus Esparza. It looks like it's highly likely to go the distance. So my question is, are they active enough to pay off that salary if they go 3 rounds?
Esparza is at 7.6K. Rodriguez, I don't see how. And again, unless she gets a couple of knockdowns, I don't think she's going to win any grappling exchanges or get any grappling points. And for Esparza to win, she needs to take the fight to the mat, right? So if Esparza gets a couple of takedowns, some advances, I could easily see her getting 10X. I don't know about optimal. I mean, it would take something, you know, more than that to get on optimal. But I mean, if you could get 10X out of your lower price guys, and you know, you shoot for your favorites to give you higher scores. I think if you said, give me Carla Esparza, she's going to score 76 points, I'd sign up for that. You know, I'd sign up for 75 to 80 points with Carla Esparza because, you know, that's 7.6K right there. If I told you, if you use Chimurev, your remaining 5 fighters can average 8.04K, something like that. You just save 400 on one fighter and you got 10X. So I would take that.
Rodriguez minus 158 and it's minus 430 to go to the cards. So yeah.
And in all honesty, that's Esparza's best chance is to get a lot of takedowns, to get grappling points, to kind of grind out a 29-28 decision.
How about in the mid tier, maybe like the slight favorite, somewhere in the 8.5-ish range? Who's jumping out for you?
Yeah, let's take a look.
What do we have here?
In the mid tier,
Rodriguez versus Esparza.
In all honesty, there's not a lot of, well, other than Whittaker, of course, at 8.3K. I think Paul Craig is interesting. You know, he is like a jiu-jitsu or die type of fighter. Like he's pulled off some big upsets by, I think he might have the latest submission. There was like 1 or 2 seconds left in a fight. He was losing badly all 3 rounds and got this highly acclaimed Russian fighter to tap. Obviously, he didn't hear the 10-second mark, and I probably didn't know how much time was left. And His corner stupidly didn't scream to him, "Hey, dude, you only got to hold this for another couple seconds," and he ends up tapping out. So Paul Craig is that kind of fighter. This is a very winnable fight for him at 8.3K. Pani Kinzad, I kind of like her. She was on Tough. She's facing Betche Correa, who's 37 years old. Great clip on her getting head kick knocked out by Holly Holm that, you might want to check out. It's kind of pretty boring fight. And then all of a sudden, Holly Holm pulls out that Ronda Rousey head kick and just drops her.
She's fighting again, right? Soon?
Holly Holm should be fighting again real soon. She's coming up. So look, I think Pani is worth a shot. She is right at, she's right at that price where, what is she? 8.4K, which is not bad. This at 8.8K, this guy Aspinall is interesting. I think he trains at the same gym as camp as Jack Shore, who was really impressive on Saturday. He's fighting a guy that hasn't fought in a while. That has a bit of a chin. Let me see. Let's look up Collier real quick. Collier is kind of a long-term, UFC vet. Let's look up his recent fights.
As you're looking it up, by the way, just to give you a second, this is what I love to see. You mentioned Paul Craig, and this is something that jumps out for me. Two fighters that are 8K, 8.2K, and they're both in a fight that's minus 340 to not go the distance. So like two guys in the mid tier that most likely somebody's getting knocked out or submitted. I'm in.
What's great about Paul Craig is his nickname is the Bear Jew, from the movie A Glorious
Tarantino. Yeah,
and he comes out with a Braveheart face paint.
Oh boy,
he's a Scottish fighter, so he does the whole Braveheart face paint when he does his ceremonial weigh-ins.
I thought you were gonna say he has a baseball bat like the Bear Jew, but
no,
he doesn't go that far.
Yeah, so Collier is actually coming off a win in his last fight where to Fortuna, but prior to that, he lost against Clark and scored 18 points. It looks like he's kind of has a win-loss thing going. He's been in the UFC forever, hasn't had a fight in a while. If you follow the win-loss, he's due for a loss. That's actually going back his last 6 fights. He's alternated wins and losses. So he's 3-3 in his last 6 fights in the UFC, which means he's due for a loss. But again, this is kind of like a prospect fighting a veteran. This guy Aspinall, he's a bit of a wild card because you don't know what you're going to get at 8.9K. And a lot of people know who Collier is and know that he has some power and could get lucky. So I would say take a few shares of Collier, but they're really probably UFC is promoting this new kid here who trains with Jack Shore. So I would look at that fight as well. Honestly, there's not a lot in the mid-range outside of the main event that I really like. I mean, I have to think there's going to be a lot of stars and scrubs lineups here. Yeah,
I was going to say salary is kind of dictating that. And also like the Vegas odds, and that's kind of how that comes about, where there's a lot of big favorites and not as many toss-ups as we normally see.
Correct.
It's going to make for some interesting lineup construction. Is there a fight that you see out of 15 that like you're going to go out of your way to make sure you get a good percentage of that, or maybe one you just kind of just mostly cross out? Again, I know you like to get a piece of everybody when you're running out 150. Is there a fight that just looks like it's going to be a snooze fest? Neither fighter is really worth having too much unless something really, really weird happens.
Yeah, there's a couple of fights like that. I mean, I like Ameev. He's actually stepping down in competition. He had 3 wins in the UFC, and then he ran into Tony Martin, Rocco Martin, who's a pretty good fighter, and he lost that fight. I kind of like him in this spot here. I think he's taking a step down in competition. My big issue is I don't know what kind of number he's going to put up. He hasn't really scored well. So if you're playing Ameev, you're playing him based on his opponent and the fact that he's stepping down and should have an opponent that he can dominate. You're not really playing him because of his past history of scoring, really well on DraftKings. Another guy I like is Shogun Rua. Shogun is a legend. He's one of the OGs of the UFC, and he is fighting Nogueira or Little Nog. So this is like a classic throwback Brazilian fight. This is Shogun Little Nog 3. Apparently they fought twice before. The fighter who's regressed the least here, and this is how I'm basing who I'm picking, has been Shogun. He has been a bit more active. The narrative around Little Nog is that he could barely walk. He's been walking with a limp since 2007, apparently. And I like Shogun in this fight. He's right at 9K. I think this is going to be a good fight for him. This is one of these, just throwback battles that, if you were to have too many cocktails and wake up and see this fight, you're like, did I just go back in time? Because I'm watching Shogun fight Little Nog. That's the reason why they put this fight on. I mean, generally these are guys that they keep behind a glass case and just kind of like revive them and blow the dust off them when they have a card in Brazil. But obviously there's not going to be a card in Brazil anytime soon. And these guys aren't getting any younger. So they're like, you know what? This is kind of a tribute fight. Come to Fight Island. We'll match you two guys up together. It'll be a fan-friendly fight. I like Shogun in this fight.
A couple things here. You would feel like you're in 2015. That's when they last fought, where Shogun did win. Minus 280 to not go the distance. So that, of course, is appealing right there.
Yes.
Rua looks like he's about a 2-1 favorite as well.
Yep.
And, if you look at the outcomes on the DK card, WL, WL, Rua got a D last time. He got disqualified. Was some eye gouging? What was going on?
No, I think that was a draw.
Oh, draw. I'm thinking disqualified. Well, someone.
Yeah, no. That was a draw against Paul Craig, the Bear Jew.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Okay,
yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I guess disqualified would be an L anyway.
Yeah, it would be a loss. Yeah, you would show up as a loss. Yeah. So yeah, he got the big draw in the last fight. I think honestly, this is a big step down in opponent for him. Maybe it wouldn't have been 15 years ago or 10 years ago or maybe even 5 years ago, but it's certainly a step down for him now.
All right, 15 fights. Obviously, we can't talk about all of them. If you guys want to know a breakdown of every single one of them, of course, your buddy, your friend, RG employee, Brett Apley, hit up his package. He's got I'm sure he's writing even more words this week when you consider there's 15 fights. So I'm sure he's having a great time with that. Give me your final thoughts on this. Of course, there's stuff that's going to change. We're recording this on Tuesday night. Hopefully not too much. Hopefully get these 15 fights, but anything we may have not talked about or anything a point you want to reiterate?
Yeah, I really have my fingers crossed. I really hope that we see 15 fights. I would look at the betting lines really closely on this fight. With 15 fights on Saturday, see if there's lineups that can be built using favorites or minus fighters in all the fights, right? Because sometimes that happens, and sometimes if you're a line value lineup builder, you could look at that and say, maybe I want to do this in cash. I've got a lineup comprised of 6 favorites. It might happen. It's unlikely because we have such a high priced favorite at the top at 9.8K. But follow line movement a lot because it doesn't always work. But we certainly see when we see rapid line movements, it's certainly something to keep notice of. And you really need to do your homework on a 15 fight card. I mean, variance is king here. It could actually be your friend because, if people are building really formful lineups, they're going to ignore a lot of fights. So if it's mass entry, the reason why us GPP players tend to like a lot of fights is because it will typically mean less ties with more fighters. When there's an 11 fight card or God forbid a 10 fight slate, you're pretty much, knowing that there's going to be ties and you have to make a decision whether you actually want to play, to be party to a tie or not. With 15 fight cards, there's less of a likelihood of there being ties, especially if we get some non-formful results. So I would just say pay attention to the line movements, see how that correlates to the salaries of the fighters. And, variance is your friend if you're a GPP player.
Yeah, if you're having a 10 fight slate and there's not a tie, like something really, really goofy happened, or you look like 4K on the table or something like that.
Yep.
That's basically how that's going to go down. Joe, I much appreciate you joining me tonight. Thank you for being flexible with your time, and also the previous shows as well too. Again, a reminder: this will be turned over to Stevie. Stevie will be back talking baseball. If you're, we're giving away premium on Thursday night for baseball for what it's worth. If you guys want to check out and watch Crunch Time, I believe Cheese is Good will be on with Kevin Roth. I'll be on Friday, Grinders Live with Cardi and Grant Neefer. Joe, well, where are we going to find your screenshot life, your 50K when you take down this tournament? It's at SunTszu, correct?
At SunTszu, correct. SUNTSZU on Twitter. I don't really do Facebook. I'm not really an Instagram guy. Although if, any of the Octagon girls Instagram to me, I'd probably get on it. But aside from that, yeah, look, seriously, good luck. It is a murderer's row of DFS guys I'm playing against. I always say this, and I know I sound like a homer by saying it. If I don't win this, I would love it to be one of our MMA DFS brethren, who's in this contest to win it. Look, Awesome Mo, Chipotle Attic, Papa Gates, they have enough money. They don't need my 50. That's a year in an Ivy League school for my daughter. So, I could certainly use that money. So, pull for me, send me your best wishes. It's all appreciated. If I do win, I will make some form of a donation to charity with some of the winnings, just because I am a strong believer in karma. So I will be making, if I win, a donation to charity. Probably a kids or a women's charity. I like to support those. So, that's it. Great working with you, Dean.
Likewise. I was on the fence. I was like, I'm not sure if I'm going to root for you or not. But then you mentioned the charity thing. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll root for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I know Awesome Mo and Papa Gates. They drive a lot of business to,
just
to you guys.
Being a smart ass.
The attic. I get it.
Joe, I much appreciated. Keep in touch. We'll see you on Twitter. That was UFC MMA. This was the morning grind. I was Dean for the last time on here. I'm out of here. Holler. Y'all be good.